So we're hoping to make this more of a conversation than a debate. I've got 10 questions. As Larry said, many of them came from people in this room. The goal is to devote about 5 minutes to each one. I'll ask a question. Each candidate will get 1 minute and 30 seconds to answer. Then some rebuttal, and then if there's some conversation, we will continue that. And if it's really good, we'll keep it going. If not, we'll move on. And then there will be closing statements at the end. So I'm hoping we can do all this in an hour, but fortunately, no one will cut us off if we go a few minutes late. Have we introduced the candidates yet? I suppose we should do that.
We should do that.
Yes. Lily Franklin here, she's the Democratic nominee, and Chris Obenshain, the Republican nominee. And they can say more about themselves as we go on. I suspect they will. So in most campaign forums, we would expect to hear candidates disagree. And I suspect over the course of the evening, we will hear that. But let's start off with a question about where you might agree. This comes in the form of questions from two different voters, Martha Hooker and Michael Hemphill, and I've merged them into one. What are 3 areas in which you're willing to work in a bipartisan manner with the opposition party in the General Assembly?
Yeah, no, I mean, first off, I want to thank you for hosting this and bringing us together. I really appreciate this. Is a great opportunity for us to be able to share and on a stage, and what a great question to start off with. You know, I think because of my experience, I worked with Delegate Sam Rasoul. I was his chief of staff. You know, I learned that, you know, about 90% of all legislation that passes through Virginia is passed in a bipartisan manner, and it's passed almost unanimously. And I think what we hear about most of the time is those party line votes. And so I think a lot of times if you're just a regular constituent in Virginia, you would think that we disagree on everything because you only hear about the things we disagree on. But there's a lot of stuff that we're working across the aisle constantly. And one of those places, you know, I think where you've seen, and I know that we've reported on, is the Catawba Hospital Center, that project. I know the legislators in this area have worked both with Delegate Rasoul and Senator Suderline and other folks to bring critical funding to the Catawba Hospital project, which would allow for more jobs and more beds around substance abuse. And so there's a lot of, especially when we get into economic development, where we can work across the aisle and that we work together on. So.
Yeah, well, thank you, Dwayne. It is a good question. Before I start, I do want to acknowledge my wife who's here today, my wife Jennifer, and my kids who are probably going to be watching this at home later and wondering what Daddy's doing up there. But this is a really important question because you know, we do have to work across the aisle on a lot of different issues. And in Virginia, you know, I think we have a tradition of doing that pretty well. And I think one of the differences between my opponent and myself is that not only will I say that I will work across the aisle, it's actually something I've done throughout my professional career. As an attorney, I've worked under 4 different elected officials, 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats. And so I've had the opportunity to actually work in administrations where I didn't necessarily agree with you know, the person that was my boss. And so I've have that experience of working with folks on the other side of the aisle. And so there are a lot of different areas that we can certainly work together in. I agree with Lily on the Catawba Hospital. I think that's an incredibly important project for our region and particularly for this district. I commend Delegate Rasoul for his work on the Catawba Hospital and re-envisioning that area and how that can be of use to citizens now and in the future. I've had the opportunity to tour it and meet with some of the staff there, and I think it's an incredible facility that's a real a gem and something that we need to keep operational here in the Roanoke Valley. Economic development's another issue that we have to work together across party lines. We need to be able to work together to create jobs here in Virginia.
So I don't know how you rebut agreement that we seem to have, but you have the opportunity.
I just think, when I worked for Delegate Rasoul, one of the things we prided ourselves in is working across the aisle. It's why he had one of the highest passage rates among his Democratic colleagues, because he worked across the aisle, even though it was a Republican majority in the House. And so that is definitely something that we worked on in that office.
Anything more you want to say?
Well, I mean, I would just point out that I think, here in Virginia, we have a tradition of having divided government a lot of times. We don't know what we're going to get at the end of this election year on November 7th. Right now, we have a Democrat Senate and a Republican House. We could have the same thing. We could have a Democrat House and a Republican Senate. We don't know. So I think it's really important to have people who have the experience of being part of teams that have Democrats and Republicans, in those teams, have worked together across party lines, and can try to get things done and solve problems. I think that's very important.
So I promised conversation. If there's any conversation to be had, now would be the time. So, if not, we will move on to some areas where I suspect there may be some disagreement. We will see. Up next, schools. JLARC recently issued a report that showed the number of teacher shortages across the state has more than quadrupled over the past 4 years. That report also said that nearly half the teachers leaving the profession were unhappy with the profession. The report also cast doubt on programs that encourage career switchers to go into teaching. It said that nearly half the school system surveyed said that the career switchers they had were poorly prepared for teaching. It also said that North Carolina spends 8.5 times more than Virginia on teacher recruitment. So what should we be doing to encourage more people to go into teaching and then keep them there? And you get this one.
All right. Well, again, obviously recruiting and retaining the best teachers is really important for our education system here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. I have a 5-year-old child who's in kindergarten, just started kindergarten this year. My wife and I have had tremendous experience with our teachers so far, and they really need to be commended first and foremost. Teachers work incredibly hard and often under trying circumstances, especially over the past 3 years. My mom was a guidance counselor here in Montgomery County Public Schools, so I'm well aware of the challenges that sometimes teachers have to deal with. One of the things that I thought was very interesting about that JLARC report that you mentioned was, though, that it's not just a money issue for a lot of teachers. The report pointed out that it's not just teacher pay that we have to be worried about, and oftentimes that is the only solution that really gets offered, is we need to raise teacher pay. In so many instances, and I've heard this from teachers, it is the environment, and it's really, to me, it's a leadership issue. You've got to have good leadership in the schools, leadership that backs up their teachers. And what I hear so much and so often is, that when teachers try to discipline students who are being disruptive in the classroom, they don't feel supported by the administration. And that is something that has got to change. We have to return to a discipline system in the school that removes disruptive students from the classroom so that everyone else can learn.
We're in the red card there.
So I'm a former teacher. I know a lot of people don't know that. I taught high school geometry. I'll never forget when I first went into the General Assembly to work for Delegate Rasoul, and I walked into the supply closet for legislators. It was basically a Staples that was taxpayer funded, about the size of this room. I could go in and get whatever supplies I needed and come out no questions asked. Then I think back to when I was a teacher. I had to fight for the markers I needed on the whiteboard. And I was a math teacher, so I was writing quite a bit. It's about distribution of resources. It's about equity. We have the funds in Virginia to make sure that we fund a world-class education system and where we empower our teachers to do what they need to do. It's a choice not to. And we must invest in the teachers. And there's a lot of different programs that exist. It's talking about making smaller classroom sizes, talking about making sure teachers have access to supplies. Just this year in this area, we've went back to an old system in making sure that teachers had to purchase their own supplies. And so we need to be thinking through what it really means to empower teachers and parents and students, because right now we're leaving a whole community behind.
You know, I think I would point out that what we've seen from the governor and the Republican leadership in the House has been this year a historic investment in education. And so, you know, I'm pretty proud of that. I would, you know, be a partner for the governor, for Governor Youngkin and his plans, you know, and what we've seen this past year and in the new budget, a 7% raise for teachers, a historic investment in education, but it's also about empowering parents and making sure that parents are involved in the conversation and that they're not silenced or shut out or put on the sidelines. I think that's really important. I hear that from parents, wanting to feel like they are part of the conversation. And so I think that's an important aspect of education. Like I said, it's a team effort. Education is a team effort. But at the end of the day, it should be the parents who make the fundamental decisions about what's best for their own children.
Is there anything more y'all want to say on schools while we have the time?
No, I mean, I think that we agree there. You know, when I was a teacher, having our parents involved in the classroom is when students truly thrived. When we built a community of resources around the parents and the students, that's when we got real results in our community. And so in Richmond, we need to make sure that we're delivering for our community.
So what I'm hearing is I'm going to have to try harder to find some disagreement here. Maybe it will come here in question 3. This is about cannabis. So Virginia has legalized personal possession of small amounts of cannabis, but has not set up a retail market for legal sales. So we've recently seen a lot of so-called adult share stores spring up, where basically if you go in and buy an overpriced t-shirt or sticker, you're gifted some cannabis. Last week we saw some police raids across Southwest Virginia in some of those stores, including some here in the New River Valley. What changes, if any, do we need to Virginia's cannabis laws? Should we allow retail sales, or should we repeal the whole thing and go back to prohibition?
So for me, this is one of those that I struggled with initially. I have a lot of family members that have struggled with substance abuse issues, and so thinking about legalization originally was definitely a tough sell for me. But we have reached a place where we decriminalized here in Virginia, and now we have created a new black market for marijuana sales. And instead of empowering small businesses and local farmers, we're allowing out-of-state mega corporations to get ready for when we eventually legalize. In addition, we're now allowing kids to get access to marijuana that's not regulated, and that's dangerous for them. There's all kinds of things that can be laced into these into marijuana, and we need to make sure that we're protecting public health and that we are getting the full benefits that we could. I mean, what we could see with legalization is the same thing we saw with microbreweries across Southwest Virginia, where we see revitalization, where we have these micro shops set up, and that we can have these businesses that are empowered, but we have to enable them to do that. Basically, I think we've gone too far to now go backwards.
So I think you may be surprised to hear that I somewhat agree, even though, look, I'm a prosecutor. And so I deal with substance abuse issues, mental health issues every single day. Personally, I really don't have a problem if people, you know, responsible adults want to use marijuana in their own home and they're not harming anyone. I really have no problem with that. I don't think we need to roll back that aspect of the law. What I do have a problem with is several things about this law. And one of those is when people who decide to use marijuana and get stoned get behind the wheel of a vehicle and put people's lives at risk. The Democrats killed a Republican bill that would have set a blood alcohol limit for marijuana the same way that there is one for alcohol. It would have allowed officers and made it easier for prosecutors to prosecute people for driving stoned. Democrats killed that bill. The other thing that bothers me is the fact that we have so many of these THC-infused edibles that are marketed towards children, that they're so readily available. They're in our schools. And And Lily wants to claim credit for a lot of the things that she did while she was working for Delegate Sam Rasoul in the General Assembly. If that's the case, she also needs to take some responsibility for things that happen under his watch, which this cannabis bill did. It created a quasi-legalization in Virginia that has confused lots of people, has harmed businesses right here in our area because people who aren't following the rules are violating it. And that needs to change. And so I would look for changes to that law that would protect public safety and create a more regulated environment so that businesses, our local businesses, are not harmed by it.
And I would absolutely agree with you that I do have to take credit for that. And that's the reason why Delegate Rasoul stood on the House floor and putting in a bill to ban Delta 7 and Delta 8 and those kinds of legislation, because we saw that those were marketed to children and that we had to put in legislation to make sure we're protecting those youth. And so he and in our office, we struggled with that legislation, and we weren't a strong supporter of legalization in the way that it came out of the General Assembly as well.
So are you okay with a retail market, a legal retail market?
I think we need to have something that's regulated. If it's going to be legal, it has to be regulated. And the problem is that the Democrats, when the Democrats were in complete control of the General Assembly under Ralph Northam, they passed this bill that legalized marijuana for political purposes. They wanted a political win, and so they legalized marijuana, but they didn't put in place any type of regulatory structure that would allow the state to, basically control it. And what we're getting now is that it's harming, like I said, it's harming kids, it's harming the mental health of individuals who are getting these products, and it's harming businesses too.
And yeah, I agree. We did need to pass regulations on this, and that's one of the things that we argued for and pushing for that. But we have now been in control, in Republican control, and we haven't seen those regulations come through. And so they've had a couple of years to work on those things and have not done anything.
Well, I would say they haven't had a lot of support from the Democratic side to try to fix the problem, so that the Democrats created.
All right, we will move on. Next question is abortion. We received a lot of questions about this topic. I'll read off the names here of people who sent in questions. Danny Axum, Karen Fisher, Jim Schuler, Peter Trower, Alice Wilson. If any of y'all are in the room, thank you. Without my glasses, I can't see you, but I'll trust you're out there. I'll merge all these questions into one. What changes, if any, should Virginia make to the state's abortion laws? The governor would like to see a ban after 15 weeks. Do you support that? Would you go further and support a total ban? Or should there be any restrictions at all?
This one's mine?
This
all
one's
right.
yours.
Well, I appreciate the question, especially because over the last several weeks, Lily has been really lying about my position on this issue, and so I appreciate the opportunity to clear up what my position is on abortion. I am pro-life. As a Christian, I believe that every life has intrinsic value and worth, and so I do support limitations on abortion. But I also support other things as a pro-life individual. I support, expanded adoption and foster care and supported those things. I support prenatal and postnatal care for mothers in need. There's a lot of other things that I support as a result of that. But with regard to the specific question, I would support the governor's bill for a limitation on abortion at 15 weeks. It's a common sense bill. It's consistent with laws and regulations around the world, including most of the countries in Europe. And it's, the governor's worked very hard to build consensus on this issue, and it's something that is supported by a majority of Virginians, and particularly people in this district. It is a perfectly reasonable bill. It's something that I would support and I would vote for. I appreciate the opportunity to clear up exactly what my position is on this. I've stated it before. In fact, it was in the Roanoke Times that I support the governor's position, and so I would vote for that bill.
I believe this decision should remain between a woman and a doctor. A lot of people don't know this, but we're on the front lines of this battle right here in this district. We, sitting in the adjacent city, is one of the only Planned Parenthood facilities that serves reproductive health care for now all of the South. And so much of the South is depending on what happens here in Virginia. I want Virginia to remain a beacon of hope for young women who are fearful of their future, and we haven't created an avenue where they can feel like they have hope. And so when people come to Virginia, I want them to know that they have that hope restored. I've been transparent about where I am on this issue, and we've seen what has actually gone through. I mean, if we think that the governor is only going to propose a 15-week ban, we're kidding ourselves. That's not what was put in the General Assembly last year, and I think that the question remains is, if Chris is presented with a 6-week ban, is he going to be supporting that ban?
Well, I think what we haven't heard is a response to your question from Lily. She hasn't answered the question of what she would support. She said she's been clear about her position, but she hasn't. She hasn't said anything about what her position is on this, whether there should be any limitation on abortion whatsoever. The Democrats have introduced a bill, they introduced it in the last session, that would allow abortions anytime, any place, for any reason, with no limitation whatsoever. That is an extreme piece of legislation, and it goes against what we've had in Virginia for the last 50 years. We've had a limitation on abortion in Virginia for the last 50 years, and now Democrats want to get rid of it. I think the voters deserve to hear whether Lily supports that or not.
Would you go beyond 15 weeks?
I would support the 15-week legislation. That's what I would do. But I think the voters deserve to hear what her position is.
What about 6 weeks, though?
Where's the line that you draw? Where would you draw the line?
Again, you can go to my website, and it's clearly written in my priorities where I stand on this issue.
Well, what is it then?
I don't believe we need to put any further restrictions on abortion than what we have currently in Virginia.
So you would support keeping the current law?
Yes.
You would oppose the amendment the Democrats have introduced in the General Assembly. You would vote against that amendment to allow abortion
Again,
up to 40 weeks.
Still don't know where you stand on the 6-week ban, a ban at conception. It's not on your website. It's not out open. And that's why we've been pushing you, because I think the voters deserve to know.
Because I've already stated what my position is.
You don't have to answer to me, but you do have to answer to the voters of Virginia.
I think you should as well.
So would you go beyond 15 weeks? I mean, Senator Hackworth, for instance, who...
Well, what's been proposed is what the governor has proposed is a 15-week limitation on abortion in Virginia, with exceptions, I should add, for rape, incest, and the life of the mother. I think those are entirely reasonable. Limitations on abortion, and I would support that bill. I would vote for it. I don't know what other legislators are going to do, but I know that the governor has introduced that bill. I know it's come up before, and I would vote for it.
Any restrictions at all? Or you're happy with the law as it is?
I'm happy with where the laws are today.
Okay. Any other conversation to be had here? If not, we will move on to guns.
Goody.
Let's just roll, man.
We're going to hit all the highlights here.
Let's just keep them going.
Sort of a similar question. Should Virginia make any changes to its current gun laws, either to make it easier or harder to acquire a firearm?
So I grew up in this community in Southwest Virginia. My family, we are gun owners. We have guns in the family. You know, I remember holding my first gun when I was 8 out at a shooting range with my papaw, who's with me in the audience today. So I have a respect for what it means to have safe gun ownership in Virginia. But unfortunately, one of the leading causes of death today for children is gun violence. And I think that we need to be open and honest about the rhetoric around this conversation. And I think that's where we go wrong in this conversation. We like to blame gun owners, or we like to blame people, but at the end of the day, it's really both. We need to come together and talk about common sense gun violence reform, because our children are at risk. When you send your kids to school every day, there's parents that are worried, and that's trauma itself in our communities. And so I like the way that we talk about, Moms Demand Action talks about common sense gun violence reform, talking about it's not unreasonable to require people to have safe storage. It's not unreasonable to have a background check. And it's not unreasonable or burdensome to not allow someone that's a known abuser to go in and purchase a weapon. And so for me, I think I would like us to really work on the rhetoric around this issue, and so we can actually come to some solutions where we can protect the people that are hurt the most.
Well, what I hear from Lily is that, she talks about rhetoric, but then she talks about all these additional gun laws that we need. And I disagree. We don't need additional gun laws. Those laws, the criminals do not listen to the laws that we already have on the books. They violate those laws every day. So adding more laws on top of it isn't going to do a darn thing. They're still going to go out and get guns and use them. If they don't care about the laws that are already on the books, adding additional laws onto it isn't going to make them listen. I've served in the Army for 20 plus years. I've sworn an oath to preserve and defend the Constitution of the United States, and I believe in that. And that means the entire thing. It means the entire Constitution. The Second Amendment is a fundamental right that people have. It's an individual right. It's something that I believe in, and that I believe that it should be protected for people who are, responsible gun owners. I believe that everybody has that fundamental right as an American. The Republicans have actually made some significant progress on a number of issues in the last legislative session. They put forward a bill to provide a tax credit for safe gun storage. That was a great idea, and it passed overwhelmingly. The Republicans have also brought in Project Ceasefire, which has had some success in other places with reducing gun violence without infringing on people's Second Amendment rights. So I will always stand and protect Second Amendment rights of gun owners. And I believe what we need to do is to enforce the laws that we already have on the books and get illegal guns out of the hands of people that misuse them.
All right, we're getting the red card there. So.
I think, again, this goes back to what I mean about the rhetoric, because that's not the place that we're talking about. We're talking about the veteran that's suicidal, that gets access to a gun and then kills himself. We're talking about the 6-year-old that finds the gun in his parents' room that's not safely stored and shoots his teacher. We have to solve those issues. I agree that we need to do some of the things you're talking around criminal justice reform around guns, but we need to also address the underlying issues when we're talking about these issues, and we have to be able to come together to talk about those things. And if we keep going down this road of one way or the other, we're going to continually have this problem. And at the end of the day, the people that are dying are our children. There are the women in domestic violence situations. They are the people that are suicidal. And so we have to do more than just not offer solutions.
Are there any particular changes you would like to see to the current laws? What changes would you like to see?
I think one of the good places is, around red flag laws. I think there's been a lot of bipartisan work done in this field. Not only does red flag laws protect victims of domestic violence, but it also protects the police officers and the others that are involved in those kinds of situations, talking about background checks and talking about, again, like Chris was saying, around safe storage. That piece of legislation that passed from the Republicans was a really good piece of legislation that helped move people further.
Yeah, so I pointed out a couple of solutions and things that have passed that are good, that don't infringe on people's constitutional rights. I think that's the problem, and that's also the problem with red flag laws. Is you don't have somebody who has been charged with a crime, you're taking away somebody's constitutional right without due process, and so there's a problem with that piece of legislation. It's a feel-good measure. It makes people feel warm and fuzzy inside, but it infringes on people's constitutional rights. there are already laws there are dozens and dozens of laws about how we can use and carry and when we can have firearms. I mean, there are already so many out there. I encounter them all the time, every day. What we need to do is make sure that those laws are actually being enforced against people. I mean, for example, if parents are leaving a loaded gun out for a child to pick up, that is already illegal. They can already be prosecuted for that. So we need to make sure that we're actually doing it, and that we're actually enforcing the law, and that we're actually getting illegal guns that are out there. And one of the problems is that the Democrats took away a lot of tools that law enforcement used to get illegal guns off the streets. When they got rid of a number of the crimes that law enforcement officers could pull people over for. That was something that happened under Democratic control when Lilly was there in the General Assembly working for Delegate Rasoul. That happened, and that has made it harder for law enforcement to get illegal guns off the streets.
Should I be able to buy an AR-15?
Absolutely. An AR-15 is just a rifle. I mean, it's a rifle. What?
Please. Please. Any conversation here?
No, I think we're on different sides of this one.
Okay. All right, well, let's move on to taxes then. Are there any taxes you would like to see changed, either eliminated or reduced or increased? I'll cite a few for possible discussion. Sales taxes, personal income taxes. The governor in particular believes our corporate income tax is a disadvantage to recruiting employers. So this one's for you. So.
I can safely say there's no taxes I would like to see increased, Dwayne. I'm a conservative. I'm a fiscal conservative. I believe that we should let people keep more of their own money. That we can empower people by allowing them to make decisions with their own dollars, instead of sending those dollars to Richmond and then having them go somewhere else like Northern Virginia or Tidewater, instead of coming back and benefiting Southwest Virginia. So I think, and especially right now with inflation and the cost of living so high, I think we need to do more to get more money back into people's pockets by, and there are any number of ways of doing that. One such way is exactly what the Republicans did in this last session, which is eliminating the grocery tax. Now, they only were able to eliminate half of the grocery tax because the Democrats opposed it. And the Democrats worked very hard to prevent the Republicans from giving too much tax relief back to Virginians. I think we need to do more. I mean, families out there are struggling right now. My wife and I both work full time. We have 2 kids, as I mentioned before, one in kindergarten, one in daycare. We're at the gas pump, we're at the grocery store every week, just like everybody else. I think we ought to be doing more, especially when we had a $5 or $6 billion surplus this year. We ought to be giving more of that money back to taxpayers.
Surprisingly, my opponent and I, we also don't, we agree on this point as well. I think in Virginia, we had a $5 billion surplus this past year, and then as you may know, is we've also had a surplus every year, even when in 2020, I would be remiss to think that we would need to have any additional taxes. I think that it's time that we revisit the way we tax and we start giving economic relief back to our working class and middle class families. I grew up in a working class family, and I understand what those pressures are. Is it necessary that we have a car tax? Is that something that we should be doing? I mean, there's a lot of different ways that we can provide economic relief to our working class families and middle class families, and that's what I would like us to see more of.
I mean, I think it's really interesting to hear Lilly talking about reducing taxes and especially the car tax, because that's something Republicans tried to do 20, 30 years ago, and the Democrats blocked it. And they've blocked it every single time that Republicans have tried to do it. Republicans have been trying to get rid of the car tax since 1997. I mean, the Democrats have stopped it every single time, and now you want to talk about getting rid of the car tax? Give me a break. You know, the people who have come down here and supported my opponent are a bunch of Democratic politicians from Northern Virginia and Richmond and Tidewater and these areas. And the reason that they've come down here to Montgomery County to support Lily is because they know that she'll be a reliable vote for their agenda. In 2020 and 2021, when the Democrats had control of the General Assembly, every single chair of every committee in the House of Delegates was somebody from Northern Virginia or Richmond or Tidewater. Southwest Virginia didn't have any representation. And if you want somebody who's going to stand up for Southwest Virginia and represent Southwest Virginia and not be a reliable vote for what Northern Virginia wants or Richmond wants, then I'm your candidate.
I suspect you may want to say something.
I mean, I have a couple of takeaways. I mean, big one is there aren't other Democrats in this area to come stump for me, and they do live in other parts around the state. But secondly, you know, when you talk about the Democratic majority that we had back then, and that the person that I worked for was the #1 person who broke away from his party. And I say that again, the #1 Democrat that broke away and Republican that voted against his party. And I've actually lost some support in the Democratic process on our side because of some of his votes that he took. And it's because he always continually fought for Southwest Virginia. And so if we want somebody who's making sure that they're fighting for their region, I've learned and actually worked in that world. And so that's exactly what I plan to do.
So are Democrats embracing Jim Gilmore several decades late and wanting to get rid of the car tax?
I think there's a lot of us, I think we've had, there's a lot of people that feel party homeless these days. And that's what I hear when I talk to people in the community on the doors, and that there's a lot of working class and middle class families that are hurting. And I think there's a lot more of us that are now running for office that see how these policies negatively impacted their families growing up. You know, when you think about the senior citizen who's owned her home for years, and we had this rise in housing this past year, and then you had these property taxes that went up sky high, but we did nothing to protect that senior citizen. And those are the people that are close and near and dear to my heart, because that's the reality of the life I lived. I lived in a working class family. I lived with people struggling to make ends meet their entire life. And I just want to provide economic relief.
Anything more to say on taxes?
I don't think so. I think, you know, obviously I've always been a proponent of reducing the tax burden on working folks, and you know, that's what the Republicans delivered this last 2 years with reducing the grocery tax, you know, and a lot of other efforts that were blocked by Lily's party.
All right. Well, we will move on. For those keeping score at home, we're now up to question 7. This is about transgender policies, and this is a 2-part question, one of which comes from a voter whose name I will probably mispronounce, and I apologize, Bruce Boatler, I think it is. The first part goes like this: should schools be required to notify parents if their child indicates a preference for a different name or a different pronoun? And then the second part is, what is your position on transgender students in high school sports?
Those are 2 very big questions that I think a lot of people are talking about. It's definitely one that I hear about when I talk to people in the community, and it's a complicated subject. And there hasn't been an answer that has been proposed. I think that I was a former teacher, and this is something I dealt with as a teacher. I had a student that transitioned, and this was before we started to try to bring politics into the classroom. This student, she transitioned, and we built a community of resources that included the parents around that, and administrative staff were involved, social services. We had a whole program that we built around this student that included the parents in that process. But unfortunately, we've decided to bring politics into this, and now the people that are left behind are these students and these parents and these family members. And so it was a two-part question. I think there's a few more to it. But
The first part was, should schools be required to notify parents in a situation like that? And then the second part was about high school sports. And
again, this is one of those things where you can fill two things at once. For me, I don't want anybody to feel like they're left out and that they're not part of the conversation, and we need to approach it with degrees of empathy. But I also don't want girls to get left behind, and I think that's really what is at the core of that question, is how do we make sure? And so I know the answer isn't where we have a whole population of youth that's more suicidal, more likely to be bullied, more likely to be harassed. But it's one of those issues I think that we need to continue educating ourselves on and talking about, because it's just such a new subject.
I think the answer to these two questions is extremely simple. Absolutely, parents should be notified. Parents need to be informed about what's going on with their child, and schools should never be keeping secrets from parents. That should never happen. And secondly, boys don't belong in girls' locker rooms. Boys don't belong in girls' bathrooms. It's that simple. That's not a difficult concept for people to understand. And it's something that at this age, until someone is an adult, when someone's an adult, they have every right to make whatever decision they want about their life. But when they're a child and you have a parent, that's responsible for that child, parents absolutely have to be informed. It's that simple.
in the high school sports?
Right. Boys should not be competing in girls' sports.
Okay.
I mean, that takes away opportunities from girls. Boys should not be competing in girls' sports.
Any other conversation here, or we run that one out? All right, well, on to number 8, energy policy. And again, we have multiple questions coming here, which I've tried to combine. A very general one came from, and again, I'm sorry if I will mispronounce the name, Elena Copa. What could we do to cut energy costs for Virginians while also reducing emissions? And then a more specific one from our MC tonight, Larry Hinker, pointing out that in 2021, the Virginia legislature passed a law that links our automotive emission standards to California. So whatever California decides appears to be the law of the land here. California has already said that the internal combustion engine cars will not be sold in the next state after 2035. So do you support outlawing the sale of internal combustion engine cars after 2035?
I absolutely do not support outlawing gas-powered vehicles. It's a ridiculous policy, and it is absolutely it's absurd that the Virginia legislature passed a law that gives its authority away for regulating our environment to California. It makes absolutely no sense. And that law was passed again when Democrats were in control in 2020 and 2021. Lily was there in the General Assembly when that law was passed. It's absolutely absurd. And you talk to people, talk to a farmer out here in Reiner and ask him if he thinks that he doesn't need his truck to do his job. It's ridiculous. It's really, giving away the General Assembly's authority and its responsibility. I think it's completely irresponsible for the General Assembly to have passed that legislation. I would vote to get rid of it. And what can we do to reduce emissions and reduce costs on taxpayers? Well, it's not the Virginia Clean Economy Act that my opponent supports, which is going to raise electric rates, raise utility rates by $800 a year for working families. That's not the solution. I support an all-of-the-above energy policy, one that includes renewables, but also includes fossil fuels and nuclear energy. I think we need everything. We need everything on the table. That competition is what's going to drive down energy rates and prices for the consumer. And so I think that's what we need.
It's not my personality to hit too hard but on things, but the delegate I worked for and everybody that worked for him in that session is best known for not supporting that piece of legislation. So I'm not sure who did the research book on that, but we absolutely were against that legislation for that exact reason, is there were no protection for ratepayers. I believe that we have an obligation to create a clean environment that isn't on the backs of consumers and ratepayers. We have these electric utility corporations that have overcharged ratepayers by the millions, and that's where we should start the build out of this clean energy economy. And there's so much work that can be done in this industry, and it doesn't have to be paid for by the people sitting in this room. We already paid for it. We were overcharged, and they have millions of dollars in the bank, and that's where we should be addressing this first. And so for me, that legislation was short-sighted. It didn't address the urgency of the crisis, and it definitely didn't protect ratepayers. And so I would love to, when I go to Richmond, to really work to correct that kind of action.
No, I mean, I think, you know, what I said, I stand by it, and you know, I also commend the governor and the General Assembly this past session. You know, one, I think the Democrats made a lot of mistakes in the bills that were passed during those 2 years, in 2020 and 2021, that basically linked our emission standards to California and outsourced our regulation to other states. But I also think the Republicans have done some pretty good things here in the last couple of years, and would try to do more to bring accountability to you know, the energy, you know, utility market, try to bring more accountability. And really it's a responsibility of the General Assembly, because we have to appoint the commissioners to the State Corporation Commission. That's one of our jobs to do. Right now, there's, I think, one commissioner on the State Corporation Commission. There's empty seats on that commission, which is the regulatory body that helps protect consumers and protect consumers from ridiculous rate increases. So we've got a responsibility and a duty as legislators to fill those seats and make sure that consumers can be protected.
And that's one of the reasons why my campaign isn't accepting money from these public service corporations, is because we have a role in appointing these SEC officers. And so one of the things I think that we need to make sure we're doing is that we're not funded by the same people that we're trying to appoint to regulate.
Now, all of the above energy policy he mentioned included fossil fuels and nuclear. Are you okay with fossil fuels?
So what I learned in the General Assembly when we did that transition is that these public electric utilities are ready to shift in whatever direction that they see the government and the public will. It's wherever they can make a buck. And at the end of the day, we just need to have that transition in mind and make sure that we're protecting ratepayers. But we are in a climate crisis, and we see how that played out across Southside. We saw, I mean, y'all did the incredible reporting on in Appalachia when we had the massive floods. And so we're seeing how this plays out. I mean, look at all the young people we have in this room. This is an issue that's top of mind for them, and we absolutely have to address it.
Do we have a climate crisis?
No, I don't think we have a crisis. Absolutely not. I mean, look, we absolutely have to, you know, take care of our environment. I mean, I think that's incumbent on all of us to do. But I would not call it a crisis. We don't have a climate crisis. I mean, and part of the problem is that you have all these outside groups that are trying to make money off the idea of a crisis by creating this idea of a crisis. And they're trying to push their particular you know, pet projects and things that they want. And that's exactly what we got in 2020 and 2021. That's why we ended up with this bill that ties Virginia to California's emission standards and forces Virginia to outlaw gas-powered vehicles. That's how we got that bill, is because of this activist mentality. that was in the General Assembly, that the Democrats, when they were in control, they were pushed by these activists to pass this legislation, and it was a huge mistake.
I will add one more follow-up to that, mentioning nuclear. The governor, of course, would like to see a small modular nuclear reactor. He would like to see it in Southwest Virginia. No guarantee that that means that's where it will be.
I'd support that. I'd support it. I think it's a good economic, good opportunity for economic development. I think there's some great things that we could do with that. We could help, work with our community colleges on creating new jobs in the nuclear industry. My cousin is actually a nuclear engineer out in California working for a clean energy company out there. And, there's a lot of great jobs in that industry. And I'd love to bring them to Southwest Virginia.
Yeah, there definitely are a lot of high-paying, it's also not just good jobs, but like high-paying jobs that we could have right here in Southwest Virginia. I think the biggest thing for me is to make sure that we are protecting the communities where these reactors are going to be in. We don't want to see something happen where we destroy the environment, where they can no longer have access to safe drinking water, things along those lines.
Okay. Question number 9. This question comes from voter Danny Axum. By virtue of an constitutional amendment in 2006, the Virginia Constitution currently bans gay marriage. The Supreme Court has overridden that ban, but a future Supreme Court could overturn that decision, making same-sex marriage outlawed in Virginia once again. Would you support a referendum to remove that ban from the Virginia Constitution?
Absolutely. You should be able to marry who you want to marry here in Virginia.
I don't think we need to change the law. I mean, it's very clear what the law is. Virginia has to follow it, so I don't think there's a need to change the law.
So no need to change the Virginia Constitution?
No, I don't think we need to.
Okay. And finally, we get to the last question. And this comes from voter Rasoul Swartz. A huge chunk of the district includes Virginia Tech students. What issues are you hearing that are most important to them, and how do you plan to address those issues in the House of Delegates?
Well, I mean, I think what's really important for students is obviously having opportunities after they graduate from Virginia Tech. I support an economy that's thriving. I support, like I said before, lowering our taxes, creating an economic environment where we can create jobs, where we can have, homes that are affordable for people. One of the things that I hear most often, and one of the things I hear a lot when I talk to folks and I'm knocking on doors in the community is I meet a lot of people who graduated from Virginia Tech and they love this area. They love all that it has to offer, the outdoors and just this incredible community where we live. But a lot of them, they didn't have opportunities when they graduated from Virginia Tech to stay here. They had to move somewhere else. They had to move to Charlotte or Richmond or Atlanta or somewhere else to find a job. And then after 10 years or so, then they had the opportunity to move back because they love this area. I think that's a real shame. I think that's something that we need to really fix. If people want to stay here after they graduate from college, they should be able to. They should be able to find jobs. They should be able to buy a house and raise their family here. And so I think we have a lot of opportunities to do that. Go Virginia and Verge are helping Virginia tap into the innovation economy and create new types of businesses and opportunities for folks. That's the kind of thing we need to encourage more of, more innovation, more jobs, and more opportunities for students once they graduate to stay here if they want to.
So this one, I've spent a lot of time talking to young voters and hearing their thoughts on this issues and the issues that are most important to them. And I think the biggest thing that we need to realize as a collective whole is that Gen Z has been through a different life than everybody else in this room, other than the Gen Z folks, obviously. That they've had a different reality that they've been into. They've had politics thrown into the classroom. They've had to deal with shooters in the classroom. They've had to deal with bans that they weren't prepared for around women's reproductive health care. They've had to deal with this ongoing climate crisis, and they're getting ready to be released into the world, and their world is not certain. It's not. We don't know what that future is. They might not have social security. They might not have access to, there's just so many things plaguing this generation that's coming into this world, and the leaders, the people up here, the people that are in charge, have been sitting in these offices for decades, and they're not doing anything to address their concerns. And that's why we're seeing them come out in numbers to vote. And that's why we're going to see them come out to vote in this election across Virginia, because they're worried about their future and they have a real stake and a real opinion about what that future looks like. A lot of the things that I've addressed earlier is kind of what I would do to tackle some of those issues that I mentioned. I think we've probably touched on most of the things that they've talked to me about.
Yeah, I mean, I think what Lily said is interesting. I think it's interesting that we have two first-time candidates running for this seat in the House of Delegates. And so I think there's a real opportunity, for our region. And what I would say is, I think I've been running on my experience in this race and talking a lot about the experience that I have as a parent, as a prosecutor, and as an Army reservist for the last 20 plus years. And I think that really puts me in a good position to be able to deliver on some of the things that we've talked about here tonight. And so, I think what's most important is that the students feel like they have a future once they graduate from college, that they're not, getting that degree and then it's like, oh, what now? And so I think that's something that I would really try to do and focus on, economic development and continuing to grow our region so that they do have options once they graduate.
Any conversation to be had on this?
No, I mean, I agree. We need to make sure that we are creating an economic development community where the young people want to stay in this region. That's one of the most exciting things I think about this district and about this area in Southwest is we just have a huge opportunity to create an economic booming community around here. So.
All right. Well, that's our 10 questions. Since I messed up the coin toss, Larry's going to have to remind me who gets the first closing statement.
I think it was me.
Okay.
So I want to start first by thanking you, Dwayne, and thanking Cardinal News for this important forum. It's great to be here with y'all tonight and have an opportunity to share my vision for Virginia. This is an important election that we have this year. It's going to decide the future of the Commonwealth, not just for the next 2 years, but potentially for the next 5 to 10 years and beyond. For too many families in our region these days, achieving the same dreams that their parents and their grandparents had just seems increasingly out of reach. The cost of living and inflation have made things a lot harder for working families here in Southwest Virginia. They've made each day a struggle just to get by. And unfortunately, the only solutions that we seem to hear sometimes are more of the same. More taxes, more regulation, more programs, more government. It doesn't have to be that way. I'm running for the House of Delegates because I believe that we can restore the American dream and that we can create a Virginia that's a land of opportunity for folks once again. And I believe that we can do that while preserving the things that make Southwest Virginia unique and special. You see, Southwest Virginia is my home. My family's been right here in Montgomery County for almost 100 years since my grandfather first bought a little piece of dirt off of Price's Fork Road and built a family and a farm on that dirt. I grew up in Southwest Virginia, and my wife and I decided to raise our children here. And Southwest Virginia has a unique opportunity this year to elect someone with experience, to elect someone with a strong voice to stand up for Southwest Virginia and the working families in this region. It's why my campaign has been so focused on my experience. For 15 years as a prosecutor, I've worked to create safer communities. For 20 plus years, I've been in the Army Reserve, first as an enlisted mechanic and now as a major in the Army JAG Corps. While there, I've learned how to lead teams and I've learned how to solve problems. And for the last 5 years of my life, I've had the most important experience, which is that of a parent, raising 2 kids, putting the life and the welfare of another person in front of my own. Throughout my career, I've worked with governments at the federal, state, and local level. I've seen what works and what doesn't, and I've learned that the best solutions don't always come from government. They come from individuals and entrepreneurs and community groups. It's that experience that I believe has prepared me to be a strong voice for the 41st House District. Well, I welcome Lily as a new resident of Montgomery County. What I think you've heard from her tonight is a set of priorities that's not in touch with this region entirely. What you would get with Lily is a reliable vote for the same old policies that the Democratic Party has put forth again and again. It would be a vote to continue those policies that have driven inflation and the cost of living to where we are today. And it would be a vote to put Northern Virginia and Richmond in charge of deciding where our tax dollars go, instead of letting you decide. I have a different approach. As a parent, like many of you, I'm worried about the type of future that we're handing off to our children. That's why I'll work to make sure that parents are informed and engaged, and they're empowered to make the best decisions about their children's education. I'll support all kinds of learning, public, private, and homeschool, to make sure that all kids get a quality education and are prepared for success in life. As a prosecutor, I've stared evil in the face, and I've argued cases all the way to the Virginia Supreme Court. And I've worked to find community-based solutions for problems like violent crime, mental health, and drugs. That's why I oppose the Democrats' soft on crime policies, and why I'll work to build strong communities to keep people safe. Finally, as a veteran, 20-year veteran in the Army Reserve, I'll always defend the freedoms that make our country and our Commonwealth great. But I'll also use my experience as a leader to find common ground and to build consensus towards a brighter future. If you send me to Richmond, I'll be a partner with the governor to pursue a future based on economic opportunity, parental empowerment, and safe communities. I'll use my experience for the people of the 41st House District. If you honor me with your vote and the chance to be your next delegate, those are the promises I intend to deliver on for the next generation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dwayne, and thank you everyone for being here tonight, and thank you, Chris, for agreeing to the forum and giving the voters a chance to hear from us both. And thank you to my family that came out tonight, and to all of you all as well. I really appreciate you being here and educating yourselves on the issues. We shared a lot tonight. We had a lot of conversation. I talked a little bit about my history. One of the top takeaways I want to share with you all is that my family and myself, we struggled in silence for years. I would watch other community members find help and find assistance, and we would be left behind over and over again. It wasn't until years later that I realized that my family, myself, we weren't the exception, we were the rule. More often than not, families are struggling, and that struggle is only getting worse. It was when I started working for Delegate Rasoul that I realized there is a way that we can help the people of Virginia, and that's through the legislature. There are so many opportunities to help people. I realized in that opportunity that I was able to help thousands of people, and I mean actually thousands. We kept a tracker. So I helped thousands of people in this region get the assistance that they needed. That when a woman came to me after her deceased husband passed away and Appalachian Power was trying to charge her double and she didn't have access to funds and they cut her power, that I was able to restore her power. that when someone needed to find assistance to find a bed for a rehab center, I was able to understand that problem and be able to solve it. I'm running for the 41st District because I want to help the people of the 41st District, not my party. I'm going to work hard for the working families in our district that are struggling in silence, because I've been there. I know what it's like. So here's my commitment. I'm here to bring hope back to our home, to be an ear to hear your problems and to try to solve them. And I'm gonna fight like heck to ensure that our region has a strong voice in Richmond, because right now that's not happening. This past year, just a few months ago, we passed a budget out of Virginia, and the top takeaway is that Southwest Virginia got left behind. They cut our critical projects. They cut the projects that we needed right here in our home. And that wasn't either party's fault to blame. We have a majority, Democrats are a majority in the Senate, and we have a Republican majority in the House. But yet, the biggest takeaway is that Southwest Virginia lost out. I have legislative experience, and going into a new legislator where there are all kinds of new people, I have that background. I'll be able to fight for this region because I understand how that system works. And so if you want a strong voice in Richmond that understands how to navigate the complex issues and understands how to lobby for this region, then I'm your candidate. So if you want to join me in fighting for this community and making a stronger voice for this region, I invite you to go out to my website, lilyfordelegate.com, or come up to me afterwards and we'll bring you into the team, because we're going to build back a Southwest Virginia that's stronger than ever. Thank you all.
Well, that brings us to the close of our evening. I thank the two candidates for joining us here. I thank all of you for joining us. And let's have a round of applause for everybody here.